Marianne Williamson is definitely more electable.
Hi everyone. This video was originally going to be about superdelegates, but I started writing a rather lengthy preamble to it, and the preamble turned into a video of its own. This video largely contains stuff that I've gone over before, so apologies if it has a clip show feel to it. But I figured a bit of repetition isn't the worst thing in the world. I mean, if Men's Health magazine can promise six-pack abs every single issue since 1986, I'm pretty sure I can do one self-indulgent video where I revisit some things. Don't get me wrong, there is new content here, but there's a little revisiting too. Either way, I hope you enjoy it. The day this video will be public is March 3rd, which means that most of you will be watching it on the 3rd anniversary of Super Tuesday 2020, when Joe Biden took the lead over Bernie Sanders in the nomination contest. That means that yesterday is the 3rd anniversary of the dreaded Bloody Monday, when the nomination was stolen from the rightful candidate, America's dad, Bernie Sanders.
What I'm calling Bloody Monday, which is the turning point of the race, namely Amy Klobuchar and Mayor Pete dropping out and endorsing Biden.
Those of you who watch this channel know that I've talked about this several times before. If you follow me on social media or look at my YouTube comments, you've seen me argue with the proponents of this theory numerous times. It's weird because usually when I make a video, it's cathartic to me, in that I've gotten the ideas out of my system. But this one, for whatever reason, still drives me up a wall whenever I hear it. And on this end, I have a few updates. Predictably, the legend of Bloody Monday has only grown with time, with the roster of candidates who dropped out at Barack Obama's command growing ever larger.
Because we all remember what happened, and man, it hurts. Oh, it hurts when you think about it. It really does. You know, it was like a day before Super Tuesday, a day before like a whole bunch of votes, and you had Beto O'Rourke, Amy Klobuchar, Mayor Pete. You had like 3 or 4 candidates who were kind of big name candidates. They all dropped out at the same time. They all endorsed Biden. And that was them shoving the knife into Bernie's back and twisting it. Because if they didn't do that, Bernie almost certainly would have went on to win. But the Democratic establishment realized, oh, well, we can't have this guy do it because he's going to destroy our whole corrupt scam we got going on here with all these, these insiders and these consultants. None of them will ever get a job again in Democratic politics. So we got to destroy this guy. They organized, and that's how they took down Bernie.
Beto O'Rourke ended his campaign on November 1st, 2019, by the way. The fish in the big fish story gets bigger and bigger every single time you tell the story, I suppose. For what it's worth, this theory isn't just propagated by internet personalities. In his new book, It's Okay to Be Angry About Capitalism, Senator Bernie Sanders repeats the lie of a coordinated dropout. As the twice-failed presidential candidate writes,
"On the eve of Super Tuesday, the establishment struck. Despite having raised tens of millions of dollars and having run campaigns that were still seen in many circles as credible, 2 of the leading moderate Democrats in the race, Pete Buttigieg and Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, abruptly canceled their candidacies and endorsed Biden. Both flew to Texas, the most hotly contested of the primary states, to appear with the former vice president. They were joined by another former candidate, Texan Beto O'Rourke, in a highly choreographed show of support. The establishment had succeeded in uniting in support of Biden the candidates who had been dividing up the moderate vote. Meanwhile, the liberal and progressive vote continued to be divided between Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren and myself. Despite poor showings in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, Warren chose to stay in the race. I was closer to her on the issues than any other candidate, but at a point where her endorsement could have been significant in a number of Super Tuesday states, she chose not to give it.
It's really remarkable to see a presidential candidate use an excuse that fails on every single level. But just one more time, for my sake, let's go through the flaws in this theory. Only 2 candidates dropped out in the days after the South Carolina primary. Pete Buttigieg dropped out on Sunday, March 1st, not Monday, and he didn't do it because Barack Obama called him. If you don't believe me, or believe all the reporting that verifies this, just look at the tape.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
That's how you end a presidential campaign.
When did you make that decision?
Overnight, just before bed, we did a call and just looked at numbers, and it was pretty clear where we are. I mean, you could keep pushing, but doesn't seem like, I mean, it's just not there.
Good evening. I'm okay, Mr. President. How are you?
Buttigieg is literally at home in his pajamas when Obama called him. That is, not on the campaign trail. Amy Klobuchar did drop out on Monday, but she never spoke to Obama, as all the reporting says. Reporter Edward Isaac Dover documents her dropout in his book, Battle for the Soul, Inside the Democrats' Campaign to Defeat Trump.
There were a few hours when Klobuchar and her top aides believed she could win New Hampshire or come in second. She tried to make the best of a far-back third, but campaign donations quickly dried up. Then she was 6th in Nevada and 6th in South Carolina. She landed in Selma, Alabama, the following morning for the 55th anniversary of the Bloody Sunday March back in reality. She sat in the back of the Brown Memorial Chapel, her first moment on her own in weeks. She thought about herself, the race. This obviously wasn't going to work. She was going to win the Minnesota primary on Super Tuesday, but what a sour sense of weakness it would display to have to drop out after that. She had never become more than a proposition, but she still wanted to be important. Klobuchar called her husband to tell him what she decided. He was in Maine, stumping for her for Super Tuesday. "I just spent 45 minutes talking to a lobster fisherman," he said. "He's going to support you." "I know he's going to be okay supporting Joe Biden," she told him.
I personally think they dropped out because they had zero chance of getting a majority of delegates. And I mean that literally. 538 put Mayor Pete's odds of being the nominee at 0%. They didn't even bother listing Klobuchar because she had even fewer delegates than he did. She had 7 to his 21. Mike Bloomberg had 0.5% chance of getting a majority, but he never planned on getting one. He was banking on getting the nomination out of a brokered convention. Neither Klobuchar nor Buttigieg got a single delegate in South Carolina, demonstrating that they probably had no appeal with black voters, which is pretty important for winning the Democratic nomination and the general election after that. Running for president costs money, and candidates tend to fund their campaigns from donor money. I've never ran for office, but I can't imagine it's too easy to get your donors to give up more cash when you literally have no chance of winning. I tend to think that was a factor in why they dropped out. Now, let's just say for the sake of argument that Obama did get 2 candidates to drop out. Okay, who cares? Progressives went almost instantly from insisting that the media was being unfair for bifurcating the field between progressives and moderates, to insisting that yes, this is indeed how politics works, and that moderates dropping out is proof of an unfair conspiracy. Also, even after these 2 candidates dropped out, the field was still split in such a way that favored Bernie Sanders. If we exclude Tulsi Gabbard, which is fine as she was completely irrelevant at that point, we see that prior to Super Tuesday, the moderate side of the field was split between 3 candidates: Joe Biden, Mike Bloomberg, who progressives conveniently forget was still in the race, and whose whole strategy was to take support away from Joe Biden on Super Tuesday, and Elizabeth Warren. Now, let me be clear. I don't think Elizabeth Warren is a moderate. That's what the online left thinks.
It's so fake. Get out of here. Boo. Next.
Oh, such a fake chant, dude.
Warren. How are these people
Warren.
behind her not sure she's going to do what she did last time and just hand her candidacy over to Hillary at the last moment?
All right, everybody, Hillary.
I drop out for Hillary 2.0.
I'm with her.
I'm with her again.
Yay.
Again and again.
So, there you have it. 3 corporate, neoliberal, moderate, establishment, sellout, lib, corrupt shills versus 1 true progressive. It's hard to ask for a better field than that. And even if you insist that Elizabeth Warren turned into a progressive on the eve of Super Tuesday, that's still an even split. On top of that, however you classify other candidates, the race was an even split after Super Tuesday. At that point, it was just Bernie and old Joe. After his success on Super Tuesday, Joe Biden did become the clear favorite. But it wasn't over by any means. Bernie had 626 delegates to Joe Biden's 713, with 2,488 delegates still left to be won. They even had some debates left, and it's not like Bernie was short on cash. The problem was, Bernie couldn't handle a one-on-one fight. This isn't conjecture. This was literally part of their campaign strategy.
We knew we needed 2 or 3 people in this race heading into Super Tuesday and beyond to make sure we could be the nominee.
And that's just a terrible strategy. The field was always going to winnow. There has never been a convention, even if you consider the most heated ones, where 3 candidates walk in with a significant number of delegates. It always comes down to 2 candidates. To think that it would have happened any other way is simply unrealistic. I think what irritates me most about the whole Bloody Monday narrative isn't that Bernie's supporters construe losing a huge advantage of a split field in a completely predictable and routine way as some scandal or conspiracy that caused them to lose. It's that it doesn't get them to question any of their core assumptions. By invoking Bloody Monday, they're essentially admitting that their candidate cannot beat any other Democrat in a straight-up contest. But then they still talk like this.
People want an actual alternative. The same way they wanted one in 2016, the same way they won in 2020, and you kneecap Bernie twice.
If there's such an enormous appetite out there for a populist leftist revolution, and Bernie Sanders is vocally offering up such a revolution, then it seems to me that Sleepy Joe's 87 delegate lead wouldn't be too hard to overcome. It seems to me like Bernie could have won over people who hadn't voted yet, which again, these voters would go on to determine where nearly 2,500 remaining delegates were going to go. They could have voted for Bernie, but they didn't. And I think Jonathan Allen and Amy Parn sum up best why voters didn't go that way in their book, Lucky, How Joe Biden Barely Won the Presidency.
But even with all the if-then factors lining up in Sanders' favor, there was a basic countervailing truth that escaped many of the fearful establishment Democrats. It wasn't just the party elites who didn't want Sanders. Most of the party's voters didn't want him either. That made the probability that he would win the nomination as small as a mouse's molars.
When more people vote for the other guy in an election, that's not kneecapping, that's not rigging, that's not cheating, that's losing. The funny thing is, this time around, the same people are now preemptively grasping at straws to explain away a 2024 primary defeat in a similarly self-defeating way. Self-help author and spiritualist Marianne Williamson is planning a major announcement in March. Whether it happens before or after this video is public is irrelevant. As we all know, it's going to be an official announcement that she's running for president via the Democratic nomination. This means that Sleepy Joe has a primary challenger. And yes, Biden is almost certainly running for a second term. Since her unsuccessful 2020 campaign, Williamson has gained some popularity with the online left due to her progressive politics. At this point, she is probably the online left's best hope at winning the White House, which is too bad for them because she's not going to win the nomination. I usually don't definitively rule things out in politics, but I'm pretty sure about this one. You know the drill. If I'm wrong, please come back here and write,
"Well, it looks like this video didn't age well."
But you're not going to, because it's not going to happen. In their defense, most online leftists, even ones who are applauding her candidacy, seem to be realistic about Williamson's odds. But that hasn't stopped them from making excuses and using the R word.
It's just blatant rigging. I mean, that's really there's really no other way to put it, ultimately.
What exactly is the establishment doing to rob a progressive of the nomination this time?
They are setting up the states in exactly precisely the order and the pace that he thinks will be best for him personally.
So how exactly is this rigging? Well, as we discussed earlier, South Carolina was Joe Biden's first win of the 2020 primary. In fact, it essentially saved his campaign. Bernie likely would have been the nominee had he put Sleepy Joe away there. But no such luck. So, since moving the state's primary up advantages Joe Biden, the whole thing is rigged and therefore his progressive challenger didn't really lose or something like that. I did a whole video on this back in December, feel free to watch it if you like. Back then this move wasn't official, but now it is. And as I said there, I 100% believe that this move was made to help Joe Biden. Adjusting the sequence at which states vote through primaries and caucuses has traditionally been a move that incumbents and well-connected candidates used to stack the deck in their favor. As Elaine Camark writes in Primary Politics, trying to manipulate sequence as a part of presidential strategy requires luck as well as political skill and clout. There are 3 major problems faced by candidates trying to create the best possible nomination calendar. The first is that the dates need to be set by state legislatures or state parties more than a full year before the election year. Typically, if the legislature pays for the primary, it sets the date. Otherwise, the state party sets the date and pays for either a party-run primary or a series of caucuses. Calculations about who will do well where, and who the opposition will be, are extraordinarily difficult to make and are often wrong that far in advance. Second, few states are able to overcome the dictates of their local politics and customs just for the glory of holding a quadrennial event. This is especially true in the case of presidential primaries, which must be financed, in most cases, by the states. Accommodating the preferred date for the presidential primary requires that the state legislature either move all primary elections to the same date, or face the expensive proposition of holding presidential primary and that state's regular primaries on separate dates. And finally, most presidential candidates, unless they are an incumbent president or have been an incumbent vice president, don't have the national clout necessary to move too many states around. Obviously, being a sitting president, Joe Biden had the clout to move South Carolina up first. One of the people who tried unsuccessfully to switch primaries around was Hillary Clinton in 2016. One of the emails WikiLeaks released showed a memo from her 2016 campaign manager, Robbie Mook, discussing the campaign's attempts to change the sequence of several states. They were completely unsuccessful in all their attempts to rearrange the calendar. This by the woman who was supposedly controlling the whole process. But we'll have to save that one for a later installment in the series. As Kamark noted, rearranging the sequence can be tricky in that your attempts to use the sequence to your advantage by building momentum through getting some easy wins in early contests doesn't always pan out, as you don't necessarily know who your main opponent is going to be. In 1980, Jimmy Carter moved up the Massachusetts and Maine contests because he thought that would help him fend off a primary challenger from California Governor Jerry Brown. Turns out his major primary challenger was from Massachusetts Senator Teddy Kennedy. A similar thing happened to Jimmy Carter's former vice president, Walter Mondale. Mondale encouraged Massachusetts and Rhode Island to move up their contests, as he thought this would give him an advantage over Ohio Senator John Glenn, who was projected to do well in southern states. Instead, John Glenn tanked in the Iowa caucuses, and Colorado Senator Gary Hart became Mondale's biggest threat. Hart did extremely well in New England, including winning both New Hampshire and Rhode Island. More recently, as I discussed in the third video of this series, people within Kamala Harris's camp convinced the California state legislature to move the primary of that state up to Super Tuesday, in hopes that this would help her win the nomination. She didn't even make it to the Iowa caucuses. Progressives could actually try to win over the people of South Carolina, but apparently they don't have the confidence in their ability to do that. Ironically, Cenk Uygur, of all people, pointed out the flaw in this fatalist thinking.
My message to progressives is this, is the same as to Republicans. Republicans go, oh my God, they're bringing in all these immigrants so the Democrats can win. And I say to Republicans, well then why don't you just win their votes? Right? Why are you assuming they're all gonna vote for Democrats? Why don't you have policies that are better, right? Now, I'll say the same thing to progressives. You know what? Figure it out. Figure it out, get better. Okay, get past the propaganda and win African American voters. And when you do, then you'll have the entire Democratic Party.
There's also another serious problem with calling this rigged that's staring them right in the face. Yes, it's true that Joe Biden did well in South Carolina after he lost the first 3 contests. In other words, winning the first contest is nice, but it's far from a guarantee that you'll win the nomination. Just like how other candidates dropping out doesn't necessarily mean your campaign is cooked, losing a few early contests isn't the end of your campaign. Also, if having an early primary state that explicitly advantages an early candidate is rigging, then by that standard, 2016 and 2020 were rigged in Bernie Sanders' favor. Sanders is, of course, one of the senators from Vermont. Vermont is right next to New Hampshire, and the 2 small states have extremely similar demographics and share a media market. This undoubtedly gave Sanders an advantage in that early contest. There's no good reason why New Hampshire is the first primary in the nation, and it certainly doesn't have to be. The DNC has a rule in their bylaws that lays out a time frame that primaries and caucuses must take place in. They do allow exceptions, and Iowa and New Hampshire have just always been granted them. Nevada and South Carolina were later granted exemptions as well. New Hampshire has it in their state constitution that they have to be the first primary in the nation, but the DNC doesn't have to honor the results of that election. They previously punished other states for placing contests outside of the designated time frame. Look up Michigan and Florida in 2008. So it's not like there's some default setting that dictates that New Hampshire has to be the first primary in the Democratic nomination process, aside from the DNC decided that it should be, and it worked out to Bernie's benefit twice. The reason the online left didn't call rigged when that happened is because they got the result they wanted. New Hampshire is also probably better territory for Williamson than is South Carolina. But she doesn't get this advantage, and now the online left is crying foul. That's too bad. It looks like Williamson will have to win over some different voters. And again, the thing that irritates me most about this is how online leftists will come up with excuses like this and not change their assumptions on anything else. They insist that the country is in such dire straits and so desirous of a left-wing populist movement, and if just given a fair chance, a progressive will win the general election. In fact, a progressive would surely do better than an establishment candidate.
This time, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, Biden is not the most electable Democrat in a general election against Trump or DeSantis. Marianne Williamson is definitely more electable.
And then they become so parochial as to believe that such a stellar candidate can't overcome a single primary move. I'll grant that the dynamic of a primary election isn't the same as that of a general election. But if this is all it takes to short-circuit your campaign, then you're probably not ready for the big show. It's just like Bloody Monday. None of this is a problem of rigging, it's a problem of your candidate sucking. If your candidate needs multiple opponents to eke out a majority of delegates, then you probably need a better candidate. If your candidate simply cannot beat Joe Biden in South Carolina, and therefore can't win the nomination, then maybe your candidate doesn't deserve to be the nominee. If you're going to insist on using politics as a means of problem solving, and you put your faith in electoralism, you should probably actually figure out how to win some elections instead of just crying rigged every time you lose.